Yay, I hit record and it's a joint with JP.
Yeah.
Is that how joint smoking sounds? That's not what we're actually doing though. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
craft books, but
Yeah, we are.
yeah.
Did I look
uh,
at my watch when you said that? Yeah, I did. I was like, oh, how long are we here for?
how long, how long, how much longer do I have to tolerate Jeff? Um,
Right at the top of
oh,
the hour.
I feel that way every morning. Okay, so we're reading a book together, or you read a book and you're
Yeah.
gonna tell
How
me
are
about
you,
it.
Jeff?
How am I? Frantic, manic. No, I'm just kidding. You and I have been on this Zoom call now already for an hour
Hmm.
and 15 minutes.
Yeah, yeah,
Because we had a coaches meeting before this. So
yeah.
a dialogue doctor
We
coaches
were
meeting.
talking about you, listener.
We were,
You specifically.
and all of our grand plots and schemes. Um, yeah, so I am rebuilding energy for round. I'm
Mm,
I'm catching a second wind right now. Yeah, that's how I am.
good,
You
good.
probably meant like more in general of like how's life
I don't
going.
know.
But I'm
I
going to
don't know
answer in the
anymore.
immediate last 30 seconds
Great.
how I'm doing.
So how are you? Low energy, wishing I wasn't here. Great. Okay,
Oh,
got it.
okay, great,
Got it.
great, got it. Let's talk. Let's go.
Cool,
Yeah,
cool, cool, cool,
no,
cool.
I am having. Okay, here we go. I've talked about this in Dialogue Doctor World, but we'll just lay it out here too. Um, I spent last year writing a book
Hmm.
and engaged with a publisher. And then on my end, I finished the manuscript, but on my end of the deal, things kind of went wonky for life reasons. And now I'm really struggling as to whether or not I actually want to publish the book. So it's in a drawer and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. That's how I am. And so I've gone back to writing fiction and it's glorious. I really enjoy writing fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice. But yeah,
All right.
so that's all. And we had one, you told me that we had one person take a whole month and read through all 78 episodes of Nerds on
They
Villa,
did. They did.
which
And it wasn't me.
those are not small episodes. So that's
No, they're
always
not.
nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's always
Thank
great.
you, that one person.
Whoever that person is, you're my
Yeah.
hero
And if
this
you live
month.
in the US, it's there for you to read, but whatever.
Yeah, yeah, you can go read Nerds. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm weird. Yeah.
True.
It's been a weird month. You and I already talked about this, but my cozy cereal is like exploding in a good way.
In a great way.
And in a great way. It's weird. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
good
What's the name of
times.
your cozy? Please give name.
Mosswood Apothecary. It's a cozy queer fiction. And a couple hours ago, I think it already went down because that's how things go. But a couple hours ago, it was within the top 50 of all Kindle Vella serials. So,
Nice. So
which are in the thousands.
if you're looking for a happy, cozy, uh, gay romance, JP has
I don't know,
Mothwood
something, something.
Apothecary there
Yeah,
for you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I have really enjoyed your Instagram videos recently that were like, you had one, I'm gonna screw up the wording, but the wording was like looking for like spicy such and such
Oh
gay
yeah, not
romance.
here.
You get cozy. And then, like,
Yeah,
I was like, this is fantastic. And like perfectly on brand.
yeah,
Yeah, it was really good. I like that a lot.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay. Do we need to talk about anything else before we
I
I
don't
should
think
have
so.
just done the intro to the podcast while we were on here.
That
Can
was
I
all
just
on
do
you,
the
my
intro to the
friend.
podcast real quick? I forgot. Okay, we have
This is
one
the
thing.
Dialogue Doctor
Well, I'm
podcast.
not going to do that part. That part I have
Oh,
to
well, I
do
did it right now.
with the music behind it. I'm going to do the part where we go, hey, here's what's happening in the Dialogue Doctor world. Everybody should go to dialoguedoctor.com right now and click on the summer and fall 2024 events in the menu and register for our Edit with a Dialogue Doctor course. You should do that right now. That's there for you to register for. It is going to be a
Or else.
9-week cohort experience in which we teach you 5 different things about editing. You get to practice it. You get to talk with the Dialogue Doctor coaches about practicing it. You're also going to get edits on a 1,500 word piece that we're going to use as examples in the class. It's going to be fantastic. Everybody should go sign up for it. Dialoguedoctor.com. Look in the menu for summer and fall 2024 events. And it's done. There we go. See, I did the intro
You
of the
did.
podcast
I'm
now.
so proud of you. Good
Thank you.
job.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, back to joints with JP.
Yeah.
It's your turn. Last time
It's my turn.
I brought a book. It's your turn to bring a book.
Yeah. Are you ready? Are you
I'm
ready for
excited.
this?
I'm pumped. Yeah. And
Okay.
this book has been on
Okay.
my bookshelf for like two years. I haven't read it yet. The
It is the
Anti-Racist.
Anti-Racist Writing Workshop: How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom by Felicia Rose Chavez.
Nice. I like this.
Yeah.
I'm excited about this book.
Yeah. So, a couple things before we start, just so people know, Felicia Rose Chavez is an award-winning educator with an MFA in creative nonfiction, has a ton of accolades, including outstanding professor and all this stuff. Uh, Amazing person. They also narrated this, I believe.
Ooh, I always
I
like it when
I
the
had to
author
listen to the
narrates their
audiobook.
own audiobook.
Yeah,
I
I'm
like
pretty
that.
sure it was her. Really good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've also
So that was
noticed that,
my
as you just held it up, that you have highlights and pages like, but you don't highlight books. So it
I
must
do
have been
I
good.
hate one, I hate like curling pages on books. I did
Hmm.
it with this whole thing. I also hate marking up books. It is a thing that like I cannot do. I In college, I bought pre-highlighted books because I couldn't
No
do it
way.
myself.
That's hysterical. You
Because
crack
I
me
was
up.
like, I can't mark it up.
That's funny.
So I highlighted this book. So that tells you how much I enjoyed it.
I'm the opposite, by the way. I curl the back. I only buy paperbacks so that I can hold them curled, and I write on every page. Even when I'm just when I'm reading fiction for fun, I underline things I like. I circle things that I like.
I can't do it.
Yeah. I don't
I
highlight
don't know
because I
why.
always lose my highlighters and then I spend like 10 minutes looking for a highlighter, but I do
Yeah.
absolutely write on every single page. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what has been your experience with writing workshops?
Oh. Um censor yourself, censor yourself. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm not actually. Uh Let me say I've only been to a couple. I'm not
Mhm.
a big workshop guy. Mostly
Mhm.
because I've spent most of my writing career being poor. So I've worked out of that in the last like 4 years. But when I first started writing, we were literally living far below the poverty line. And I was like, begging and pleading to pay bills and like working temp work. And it was bad. So I didn't have money for workshops. My experience with them is that they tend to be expensive. Uh,
Mhm.
which immediately limits who can attend. Um, and they tend to be experiential, so they're like tied to a location or some kind of vacation type thing. Um, yeah, I think that's my experience with them. I spoke at one that a friend of mine held in Atlanta. I was super happy he asked me to come and speak at it because otherwise I would not have been able to pay to go. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it was great. Um, I don't, yeah, that was way before the dialogue doctor. I don't know that I deserved to be speaking at it, but I was a friend of the guy who was running it. So I got slid in under the wire. Um,
Nice.
have I actually been to another one?
Have you been to
I
any of like the like college-esque ones or like critique groups or anything like that?
I don't even know what you're talking about, so I'm gonna say no.
Okay, great.
I was a pre-med major. I took science classes in college. I
I
didn't
took
start
science
writing
classes and
until
creative writing.
I didn't start writing until well into my 30s. So I don't
Gotcha.
know. I
Okay.
started writing at like 33, 34.
Yeah,
So by
yeah.
the time I
Okay.
started writing, I had 5 children and I had no idea how to feed them. So this was,
Fair, fair.
yeah. So I was like
Well,
not going to workshops.
I will say as like a caveat then, this book is explicit to like an MFA program and or like a writing workshop that one would have in a undergraduate class or like a creative
Fascinating.
writing course.
Okay.
However, I think that we can pull a lot of good bits of information as to how we could approach writing workshops through this method, if that
Nice.
makes sense.
I'm excited about
So
that.
what and I have a very strong aversion to a lot of writing workshops because
Hmm.
I did not like my experience with writing workshops in college. It was very much sit around a circle, shut up, people will rip your stuff to shreds. And,
Ooh, that's not
you
fun.
know, well, and the thing that a lot of people listening might resonate with and be like, well, yeah, that's how you learn and grow. That's my argument. And I think that's Felicia's argument with this entire novel is most of the structures built in place, including the silencing of individuals so that their work gets torn apart, is sort of built on white supremacy, more or less.
Interesting. So you're describing like what I saw on the TV show You, where like
I
one of
didn't
the
see you,
characters
sorry.
gets accepted to like an MFA program, and the program
Mhm.
is literally her like reading, like people reading their work, and then everybody in the room going like, well, I thought it was derivative when you said blah, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah,
yeah,
blah.
that's exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Oh
And
man, I'm
that's
so glad I've
how
never
a
been a part of
lot
one of those.
that's how a lot of writing workshops existed. And I think some are changing without this structure here, but that's sort of how they existed for a long time. And it was this idea of building a strong background or a backbone. And one of the things that Felicia kind of brings up right off the bat is the backbone that both the instructor and the students have are all built on quote unquote classics that are almost always white or will have a token person of color in it. And therefore, it's mimicry into a white voice. And therefore, you are diminishing and silencing other people's voices by forcing them to mimic into these accepted classics.
Oh, okay, wait, let me say that back to you just to make sure I got that. So, and I'm going to repeat it in my own words because I think that's super important and I really want to
Yeah,
understand it.
yeah.
So, everybody in the room is bringing their authority to what's right and wrong based on a series of classics. But
Mhm.
because America is racist, that
Yeah.
that series of classics is from a very specific ethnic social group,
Mhm.
which means everyone is being unknowingly, but because of where we gain our authority as to what's good or what's bad, everybody is unknowingly, ideally unknowingly, drawing
Ideally unknowing.
from, ideally unknowingly, drawing from a very specific racial class that excludes voices that might be diverse or value other things.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice. I'm in for this already. I'm here for this. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly with that concept because I think that um when considering a lot of like syllabuses in college, especially a couple years back and even when I was there, they tried to bring in more like diverse voices, but it was always like, here are the classics, and then here's
Mhm.
Baldwin. Look at this, like this person of color who has this special voice, but it's always like this person put on a pillar instead of just saying like, here is a collection of voices. Um, and one of the other things that Felicia talks about is not necessarily looking at the classics, but considering contemporary works and actually building a syllabus with the students so that they participate and they bring the voices that, and this part, I'm going to put a bunch of caveats right now into this is the second time I've read this. It takes me time to process things. So this is partially my interpretation and partially what's written in here. But what we're talking about here with building a syllabus with the students and them bringing the voices that have really empowered them and
Mhm.
brought them to inspire them to write makes it an even playing ground. And no longer are you going to be the quote unquote instructor, but now we get to pick apart pieces that exist in modern day and pick apart why they work and see how these voices can then translate to the workshop.
Interesting. So I really like this. I'm really glad you brought
Good.
this book.
Good.
Can I just start asking questions or do you want to go through the book?
Yeah.
Okay, I can
I'll
just
just keep dumping in whatever I know out of this
great. I
thing.
like it. Okay. I'm excited about explaining this as a cis heterosexual white male.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm qualified to bring new nuance to this topic.
Great.
Uh,
Cool. Yeah, both of us white, both of us male
sorry,
presenting.
here I come. Never fear. I feel like I can do any job at any time. So the so part of my question is, this is just me seeking to understand.
Yeah.
Often the classics are leaned upon because we say art is subjective.
Hmm.
So if you remove the classics, how do you know what's good and what's bad?
How This is
Like if
such a
I'm
great question.
asking,
I think she talks about this too, and this is me trying to remember this. Why are you trying to argue what's good and what's bad? Did it work? Did it sell? Did people enjoy it? Did you resonate with it when you read it? I think good and bad is subjective,
yeah, that's super true.
right?
Yeah, it is true. And I guess my question is, and again, I'm not pushing back. I'm really just, I like what you're saying better. But to continue to play the devil's advocate, which is always a terrible position to put yourself in, I'm going to be the voice for evil. Um, so if the assumption there is that everybody's, as I'm saying, I sound like an a-hole. The assumption is that everybody's
Yeah, Jeff, go
opinion
on.
the assumption is that everybody's opinion is worthy of having in
Yeah,
her approach, as opposed to saying, I am the
sort of.
professor and I know things, and you are the student and
Yes,
you are
yes,
stupid.
yes.
Yeah.
It does bring apart a democratic thing. So here's like a quote from it that I think that this will help lay the groundwork as to what this workshop is. So the anti-racist workshop is a study in love. It advances humility and empathy over control and domination,
Hmm.
freeing educators to deconstruct bias to achieve a cultural shift in perspective. Design democratic learning spaces for creative concentration. Recruit, nourish, and fortify students of color to best empower them to exercise voice. Embolden every student to self-advocate as a responsible citizen in a globalized community.
So I'm going to take off my devil's advocate hat now and say, I really love this. I think my wife and I were exposed to this kind of education when we were living in Baltimore City, and we banded with a bunch of parents to help build a charter school. And
Hmm.
it was based on this book called The Thousand Languages of Children,
Hmm.
by which lays out this style of education called the Reggio Emilia style. And part of what I love what you're saying about like humility and love in education with empathy is, I don't want anybody to throw those words away as like, oh, these are just like, weird keywords. Approaching education with the professors, the idea of humility and love, you come to it with the like, my job here isn't to give you information or to
Yeah.
teach you a system. My job here is to, as someone who's asked more questions simply because I've been around longer, is to help you
Yes.
learn to ask questions about what you're doing.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it kind of turns the idea of teaching on its head to be like, I have a set of principles I'm going to teach you, and rather, I, you know, I'm going to show you the kind of questions I ask when I approach something like you're approaching, in hopes that you can ask those questions too and come up with better answers than I could have ever had on my own. Like, I like that positioning of
Yeah.
teacher and student. Yeah.
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 And one of the things too that she says is all writing is a form of protest, or all writing is political. And it's this concept that even if you are willfully writing something that is not political, that in and of itself is still a statement. And so it's this idea that embolden that voice to flourish in whatever which way it can, but recognize that especially as the quote unquote instructor, that you don't know everything. You cannot truly know everything, and therefore you shouldn't be that form of control over
Mhm.
the students, but instead encourage them to continue to grow.
Yeah, just to like come under that with like Godin's understanding of teaching and some of these other like really great educators who write about this, the idea of the industrial education was that we were going to put you in chairs filling out worksheets so that you learn a specific the perfect way to do something, because in essence we're preparing you to work in an industrial line. So we ring a bell when you change classes, just like in the factory they ring a bell to get you to start
Mm-hmm.
and end your day. You have a lunch break just like you're going to have a lunch break at your job, because the idea is that you're learning to be a cog in a machine. And
Yeah.
education wise, there's the create what I would say is the more creative class education, which is where, thankfully my kids' public school systems are headed, is more a no, no, we're not going to teach you to be a cog in the machine. We're going to empower you to create and think innovatively by equipping you with tools as opposed to giving you maxims.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in education, in the world of Wikipedia, like there is no reason for me to make you memorize when George Washington was born. You can go
Yeah.
look that up. there's no. Whereas, like when I was growing up, like those kind of stupid facts were like the center of education. So anyway, I'm just applauding the education. I love the educational approach she's bringing already
Yeah.
to writing. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah. And like she would get a ton of pushback from professors when she was doing this approach, saying that like this form of empathy and what you're doing, it's too soft. Except the
Mm-hmm.
way that she graded students was this expectation of ritual that you come to my class, period. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. If you don't come, you lose a half letter grade, period.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's to expect that people will come in and that they will do the work and that they will foster that connection with people. Some of the other things that she does when like there's a writing group or a collection is a check-in. How are you doing? And at first with students, they're sort of, hesitant. They'll say, I'm fine and move on. But the more that you offer that space, the more likely people are to open up. And then the more likely they're going to have empathy and understanding when someone brings something to the table that's their writing and they're able to understand where they're coming from, the context of what they're writing, and then be able to provide actual feedback that will help their voice grow without conforming to an expectation.
Mm, I like that a lot. Does she talk about what it takes to create that kind of safe space?
She does. It's a lot of like room preparation. She will offer and she had to learn this as well. Like she can make the space, but if she's not doing it as well, if she's not participating as well, then people are more hesitant to do so. To call things out when it needs to be called out, I think is another thing she mentions, and make that course correction. So sort of like laying the framework and expectation around it. You will come in or you will lose a letter grade, and there is no change to that. We will have this check-in and we'll all go around and you don't have to say anything, but you will be acknowledged.
Mm,
Um, and just making that space and that habit form, which I think like even in like one of Jay's masterminds, I remember the first few times because you and I were both in it, like he did the round robin where it was sort of a check-in and we didn't really know anybody at first, but then like some very deep conversations happened there
yeah,
because people's lives, like as they start to open up, they're more willing to have that, like, here's where I'm at, here's why this week's stuff isn't that great, and
yeah,
we were able to sort of recognize that sort of empathy between people.
yeah. I think there's you know, apply. You may have already thought about how to apply this to people listening, but I think this is true in our editing circles as well. Like
Mm,
one of the things that I do when we edit that comes from this kind of line of thought around education is rather than like just telling people what I see wrong. I don't know if like I always try at the first of an editing session to ask like, what do you want this to be?
Yeah.
What's your
Yeah.
goal here? What is this? Before I assume that I know what this
Yep.
is, I always say, what do you want? What are you looking
Yep.
for? Even after I've given somebody notes, I'll ask and like, let's go, what do you want to talk about? We have an hour and a half together.
Hmm.
What is on your mind? What's important to you? Because what's important to the person I'm working with should be the most important thing to me, not
Yeah.
what I think is right. Does that make sense?
It does. And this is actually so I'm going to tell you how she sets up the formal writing, quote unquote, critique and or
Oh, I
workshop.
love that. Okay.
Um, and understand that this is in a classroom setting. And I
Mhm.
think that we can still apply it in form of editing. But as opposed to that individual being silenced, they actually are the one that cultivates the conversation. They set the ground for expectation on what they're looking for in this piece. They also, I believe, have like an artist's note ahead of time. And
Mhm.
this was something that she talked about when she went to other artistic critique groups. She realized that they didn't tear people apart. And usually a form of art that hung on a wall, a dance, anything, there would almost always be in museums or in these critique groups little placards that said what inspired you to do this. But we don't do that with fiction writing because we have this expectation, or even just literary writing, because we have the expectation that it's supposed to stand on its own. But
Mhm.
I even am thinking about this in my own fiction writing. Sometimes people want to know what drove that conversation.
Yeah.
The movie Annihilation and the story that it's tied to, I love, and I don't know if this is 100% true, but I love the theory and the idea that it was built off of the idea of women going through cancer
Mhm.
and understanding that that's the creative choices that went through in at least the movie, if not the actual short story. Um, and then being able to enjoy that piece more. The author note was additive. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, they shouldn't have told me this because I just wanted this piece to stand on its own. But yet we
Mhm.
almost have this expectation that pieces should stand on their own. So that's one thing, is there's like some type of author's note ahead of time. Then the individual reads the work out loud, and that is the first time anyone in that room is hearing that work. They have it in front of them, and they can do check marks on things they like and question marks on things that they're confused about. Um, then there's a set. I think it's like four things that they go through. And I just need to find the page in here. Um, where participants offer statements of meaning. So they'll say what's stimulating, surprising, evocative, memorable, and touching, etc. Then the artist will pose the questions. So they'll be the ones, and it's not what do you all think, and it's not so narrow as to say like, is this grammar correct? But instead, it's looking for pointed feedback on aspects of their work that matter most, taking in consideration where the draft is in its development process. So it's meeting the author where they need to be met and asking for that feedback of like,
Mhm.
now that I've read the work out loud, now that you've told me things that may have been evocative, I need feedback on this piece that I'm working on. Step three, the respondents pose neutral questions. So it's how would you categorize your voice in this essay, as opposed to the theme is bad or your choices are bad. It's posing those sorts of neutral things of saying like, how would you go about doing this, or how would you categorize it? And then step four is participants raising permissed opinions. And this is, I think, another place that fosters that trust. Someone can say, I have a personal opinion about your title. I have a personal opinion about the way this character grew because maybe they didn't like them, or something, but they recognize it's personal. May I ask it? Uh, and at that point, the artist can say yes or say no, and they move
Mhm.
on based off of if they want feedback from that person. I think that this really works in terms of um, writing courses for newer writers, sort of building and understanding their voice in this sort of education format. But I still think that there are pieces here that we could use as editors to meet people where they are.
Yeah, I love the process that you're explaining, and what I see and what she's doing is she's you know, so often when you get critiques from somebody. Like, let's remove like
Hmm.
editors for a minute because we can talk about them in a minute. But
Yeah.
when you get like critiques from a writing group, like let's say you're in a group on Discord and you're like sharing your work and everybody's like giving you their opinion of it. I've when I used to be in those before I started editing, I'd find that 9 out of 10 times what I was saying was actually a critique of my own work. It was what I
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
struggling with, but I was criticizing somebody else's work because it was what was on my mind. And when other
Yeah.
people would criticize my work, I'd be like, "Wait, I don't even where did that come from? Like, what are you talking about?" And so what I like with the statement of meaning, like this is what was meaningful to me, what I see kind of psychologically happening in myself if I were to do that is this is remove like giving me the opportunity to speak to the positive things in the work that I liked and refocusing my center on that and then letting the author drive it or asking neutral questions is kind of recentering me around like this isn't about me. This is
Yeah.
actually about the work that's happening around me. If that makes sense. So it's
Yeah.
that like removing myself and actually being able to help somebody else with what they need as opposed to bringing all of my baggage into my one note on how you wrote this sentence. Does that make sense? Like,
Right. Yeah,
yeah,
no, it does. And I feel like that's very true. And like uh, in a different circle with a different group of writers, there was someone who critiqued another person's work. And one of the questions was, because they were given a list of questions, was did the overall theme resonate or something along those
mm,
lines? And the response was, what theme, LOL? And the person who wrote that is a writer
yeah,
writing to another writer.
yeah,
Uh, and it irked me so much because I'm just like, you should recognize that there is empathy when it comes to work and critiquing work.
yeah,
And it is actually reflective of you that you would think that making a response like that would make sense,
yeah,
and that it actually is poor quality on the writer, the critiquer, to have said that because it provided no critical thinking.
yeah,
And honestly, like that's such a thing that, in my opinion, if you are critiquing, you should be critically thinking and you should be looking for anything. If you don't have a response, then you should say, I didn't recognize a theme in this work. However, I can see that you are writing about insert whatever they're writing about.
mm,
Let's say it's a fantasy about a hero. Use a little bit of critical thinking. What sort of themes exist there? What would you
yeah,
think would exist there? And maybe write, is this what you were going for? And then maybe follow up with them. But it bothered me enough that I was like, this is why I think that we need these sorts of things, because there's like this weird realm in that I think is fostered out of critique groups of this competition and this like which is good and which is bad.
hmm,
And all it does is knock other writers down, and I don't like that. And that's why I steer clear of critique groups, not because I personally had a bad experience, but just because I could see that it wasn't a place for me because I didn't know how much I could show at the table.
yeah,
Um, and like this is coming from someone who's a white male identifying person. However, I'm queer, I'm non-binary, and I've had normal people complain about using the pronoun they them in it, and I'm just like, it's not for you.
hmm,
But it's that risk of like, how much do I have to conform to someone else's expectations of quote unquote good writing? And I know enough of myself that I don't have to. I can
yeah,
write whatever the hell damn I please. But there's that concern that other people who are new to writing and new to understanding will feel like their voice must be diminished or shaped into a certain way. And that's why I
mm.
really like books like these.
Yeah. I think I know as an editor, It's very easy to forget that there's a massive power dynamic happening, like you're
Mhm.
describing. And I'm just thinking again, I didn't read the book. I'm, just responding to what you're saying. But
Yeah, yeah.
there's a big power dynamic that happens that as an editor, I'm highly aware of like the person bringing their work to me is putting themselves in a position of vulnerability. They're in essence offering some of themselves up to um to potentially being wounded or being hurt.
Yeah.
And that I think is existent on a level in which for every writer, in which like what we write is very personal, so we're bringing it when we give it to somebody to ask for an opinion or ask for a review or ask for whatever. There is a like vulnerability there. That vulnerability gets increased, I'm aware of 100 times, 1,000 times fold, when you're already in a vulnerable population state. Like you're saying, as a
Mhm.
queer author, you're already in a position of vulnerability in society, so now you're a vulnerable person offering vulnerable work. And like it's very easy for me as a editor to be that, well, I have all the power here, I can say whatever I want.
Yeah.
I've seen so many writers just emotionally destroyed by the edits they get because the editor didn't take the time to understand the power that they have in that moment. And
Mhm.
they threw a
Mhm.
stupid comment out like, what theme, LOL, which is an expression of that power of like,
Yeah.
I have the ability here to be snarky and mock you and not take into consideration that you actually brought this very precious thing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it makes me mad too. But it
And
sucks.
I think that like one of the things that I like about our editing style is, and like sure, wholeheartedly agree that there's still more work to be done to figure out where we can improve. But like for me, when I do edits, I always do it as a comment. I try to leave the work alone. Um, and for me, I will say like, here's a suggestion as to how I would adjust this, and then we will talk on it as to why I approach it this way. One thing I'm thinking back to was sort of a love story in which the small moments could be expanded on to really sit in that moment with that character and feel that emotion with that, and it was sort of quickly moved over. And by all means the writer can do that, but here's where an emotional hit could happen if you wanted to explore that. And it's this sort of conversation of like, if you want to do it this way, this is how I would approach it, and meeting someone at their level. Still a lot of work to do there, but I think that that's how I'm viewing how I can be both a better editor and then maybe one day do something like a writing workshop that really focuses on more like this stuff.
Yeah, I really yeah, I am in no way fully formed. I think what you're sharing are principles that I aspire to.
Yeah.
That's fair
Yeah.
to say. Like I'm not, it's not like, oh yeah, I do this. It's like, oh, I really wish that I did this. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, or like I
Yeah.
wish that I did this to the 100% and I'm getting there but I'm not there yet. And I think that should be the response. I think honestly, I think that if either one of us were like we're there, that would be the
This is
problem.
your problem. Well, I am a cis white male. I can teach whatever I want. Um, what's that? Seth Meyers had a joke recently where somebody was like, could you, there was a joke about, you know, there needed to be a new curator of a Black History museum, and it was like, oh, I think I could do that job, said every white male ever. There is that, yeah. But sorry, that's a weird distraction. Something you said about the competitive nature
Yeah.
of writers. I just want to pause there because I fully believe that writing is a team sport
Mm-hmm.
and not a
Mm-hmm.
competitive endeavor. Like we're
100%.
not, even when it comes down to like our Amazon ranking, um it, you do better to collaborate with people that share readers than to see yourself as competing against them.
Yeah, yeah,
And again, it comes
100%.
down to the power dynamic. It comes down to like understanding that, yeah. But I dislike it when writers need to position themselves above others to make themselves feel good. Other writers.
Yeah.
It makes me
And
sad.
um in the book, Felicia's talking about this one time that she was in a writing course. I think it was her or it was somebody who had written to her. Regardless, um, they were in this writing course. They were given um essays from people beside them, and they
Mm.
were supposed to rank which one was good and which one was bad.
Ooh, okay.
And she refused to do so
Yeah, I don't know that
because,
I could do that.
and
On what
it's
metric?
because
What's the metric I'm using here? Yeah, anyway.
one, it's cruel, right?
Yeah.
Um, because if you are especially newer to writing, or this is like if you're in an education system and you're working through this, you are probably going to pick things that are of closer quality to what you would expect. There was no surprise that the black woman got the worst ranking
Yeah.
that day. And so all that does is that continues to separate and other people
Mm.
by doing that sort of ranking of what's good and bad. And so that was just another thing that I read, and I was just like, this is why there is a problem. And this is why even at the start, at the education for those that seek it through college, with creative writing and whatnot, that fundamental groundwork already is fostering this competition that just shouldn't exist.
That's so interesting. So talk to me more about the like workshop and what she's looking for in that and kind of
Yeah.
how that plays out. How does she see students coming out of that in a positive way? Like what is
So
that?
throughout the entire semester, there are what she doesn't call workshop, but then she later calls mini workshops, because what it's doing is it's preparing them for this bigger workshop by the end of the year.
Mm.
They are getting prompts, and it can be listen to this piece of media, read this piece of media, and then gather like how that voice functions, and then take this prompt and work off of this. They get like this composition workbook. They're meant to free write. Um, I think for like a set 15 minutes without any editing, period. And she likes things done tactically by hand,
Mm.
because the idea behind it is you can't delete, and you can't you eventually will stop scratching stuff out and editing. And then later she'll introduce a time frame where you can then go back and edit it as well.
Mm.
But it's this idea that you just keep writing and writing. You perform it, you
Okay.
read it out loud to somebody, it gets recorded. They read it to you. So it's your
Mm.
own work being read to you. So you can recognize where things sound strange and off, because someone else has different cadence. Someone
Yeah,
else has
yeah.
a different way of
Yeah.
talking. So that's really when you can recognize when your writing has things that you can correct. But it's this shared universe basically of different models, different prompts, that really build how a author should have their voice, a writer should have their voice, based off of a lot of freedom.
Hmm.
And of course, this is me like terribly summarizing a bunch of stuff that's in here, but overall I think that it instead of the model where I think she was saying people basically in old model would get two critiques a year
Mm.
or a semester, and that was about it. And that was really all they could know about how they grew. It's almost like they're building up to this bigger moment, and they can really see themselves growing through this process by doing these smaller things in these smaller workshops.
Mm.
And there's like expected homework almost every night. Is like free writing every night that's meant to be in the work composition book. And then by the end of the year, it's even like you tear pages out and you put them together and you point at like, this is how my voice was, and now I've changed it to this. Or like you can
Interesting.
borrow from others to say like, this one really inspired me to write how this works or whatever. Um, all of that leads to formal workshop. And in formal workshop, uh, the thing that she does is a pre and a post with the individual
Hmm.
that sits in the workshop.
Okay.
So she'll do a one-on-one with that person beforehand to say, like, what are your goals going into this? What do you want? Do we need to go over any of your questions? Because you have three of them to ask.
Mm,
And that's one thing too, is you get three questions as the reader of what you want out of the collective workshop. And then afterwards, it's almost like a deconstructive moment. Like she will sit there in workshop, she will mark up, but she may not necessarily participate in the workshop as much as an instructor normally would.
mm,
Maybe if she gets asked to say something or wants to correct something that she recognizes should get corrections. But she will sort of sit back, and then if they want to specifically ask her and they want her opinion on stuff, then they'll do it at the post
mm.
session that they have.
Yeah, I like that. First, I love that she's aware of kind of her position as an instructor, again, like the power dynamics. I think one of the
Yeah.
weirdest things about, and again, I haven't ever been in a writing workshop, but from what you're describing, I've been in a lot of these kind of settings for like other academic pursuits. Like
Hmm.
I used to be in a sermon workshop. Um,
Ooh.
that's a nightmare. So, but there is when the instructor speaks,
Yep.
everybody else is quiet. And then
Yep.
once the instructor speaks, all information is everything anybody else says is definitely positioned around what the instructor said. So I think
Yeah.
there's really beautiful humility and understanding her own position and what she's saying around how she's structuring herself. And I think that's something definitely we can take away from this as like, because I'm not going to hold an academic workshop anytime soon, right? Like
Right.
I'm not a university professor, but I can replicate what she's talking about in my own attitude toward my own voice and understanding that like
Hmm.
when I'm in a room with a bunch of people, understanding what my power level is with these people and knowing that like I may by speaking actually disrupt what's happening in the room.
Yeah.
And by voicing my opinion, I might actually shut down what could be really great learning. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, like it really teaches how to as these other students that aren't in the seat, it really
Mm-hmm.
teaches them how to ask valid, good questions and recognize when it is an opinion-based question
Mm,
versus when it is something else. And another thing that they do throughout the year, because they all lead up to this workshop, but they're reading and consuming media from mostly modern and contemporary works.
mm.
And they'll actually, if they can, bring in the author of that and they'll ask them
Oh wow,
pointed questions.
that's nice.
Because that's the joy of not having the classics is they're all not dead.
Yeah, they're
So
here. They can actually talk to you about it. Yeah,
you can actually ask, what was your intention with doing XYZ?
yeah.
Um, and that way the students get that understanding as to how to communicate and ask what they are truly trying to understand about the piece. Another thing they do is uh she she has four terms um that she uses, and I just need to find them because I think they're important. um Voice, imagery, characterization, and arrangement, or what students call flow. Those are the four categories. Now, what
Mm,
they do is they'll break apart different texts, but at the end of the day, each class is defining their own terms for those categories. She will ask, what is voice? And that will lead the conversation, and she'll be in front of a whiteboard, and she will take what the students say, and they will start
mm,
to form their own definitions. And so it may alter based off of each time that they have a different semester based off of who's in the room.
mm,
But she's basically allowing and giving power back to the students by defining their own terms and having their own collective words
yeah.
as definitions. And I think that that is another way of sort of leveling the playing field and recognizing that overall these categories exist. We recognize that, but how we define them is almost always changing
Mm,
because it depends on the context. It depends on who's in the room. What's the cultural impact of
Mhm.
this? What's the cultural impact of the concept, the content you're absorbing? And so I think that I really love the approach of like having this like redefinition or this ever changing term.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. I really like that too. And it's there's a team building, cohort building experience there in
Yeah.
which goes back to that anti-racist title and concept. Sorry, just thinking out loud, and that like we're not applying old standards to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
this that may or may not actually fit into your work. Instead, what we're doing is as a community, we're defining what we're looking for and then being true to that understanding of what's happening, which I think is again assumes knowledge and value of each person coming into the room, as opposed to people come in the kind of old traditional classroom style. People come in empty and your job is to fill them up. This is a
Yeah.
people come in filled with life experience and uh, value, and then the value is shared amongst the participants, which I think that's really cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that she says that more or less. I mean, that's a really big concept when it comes to basically anti-racism is that people come into a room with experience that is not of your own, and to not have these pillars of definition that are more or less constructed from the classics,
Hmm.
and instead allowing space for people to interpret and to redesign is really important. I mean, that's how we get new and innovative ways of telling story, and that's how we let people tell the stories they want to tell without having to code or hide the way that they want to tell a story because it doesn't quote unquote work with me, or it doesn't fit with how I think stories should be told.
Yeah, it's kind of like, if we could teach the world to sing in perfect harmony and buy them all a Coke, what we would do, like, is that because right now, anything that's innovative in the creative space has to fight its way up the mountain. You
Yeah.
have to fight all of the expectations, not necessarily of consumers of your creativity, because readers, if we give it directly to like novelization and stories, readers are much more open to creativity than other
Mm-hmm.
writers
Mm-hmm.
are. And
Yeah.
you have to battle through every other writer telling you you're doing it the wrong way until
Yeah.
finally you prove you're doing it the right way. And then you're accepted. And then other people copy you and tell people who are innovating on what you did that they're doing it the wrong way. So this
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
constant build of like, you know, repositioning ourselves as the people who have the answer. And if we
Yeah.
could like, sing in perfect harmony, there would be, I think, that embracing of everybody's innovation and creativity and allowing things to stand on, like giving things a chance to stand on their own before we start
Yeah.
chopping them down. Like it removes the need to battle up that hill to prove no, 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 I am innovating on a classic. I do know the classics and I'm innovating on the classics, so please gatekeepers let me through. This asks the question like, is it just like, let's look at it and see like, what is this, is it doing what you want it to do? Then
Yeah.
there's the bigger question of like the market, of like, does the market like what it's doing, which is a
Exactly.
totally different
Exactly.
question, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, so for me with editing clients, I've been trying to steer away from have to, or you're gonna have to have this, or you need this.
Yeah.
Um, because even using story hypothesis, I recognize that it is a method that doesn't fit every story, and it doesn't have to have every scene in there.
Yeah.
I can suggest that, and I usually do this. If you want a story that has a 3 act structure that fits Western media, like I try to put all these caveats in there, then maybe adding in a scene of transformation in this area makes sense.
Yeah.
But you don't have to. And I think that, at the end of the day, you don't have to. I mean, the cozy serial, I'm doing Eastern storytelling. I'm trying my hardest. I'm trying my damnedest to keep it cozy, but I have high action scenes that people are probably going to be like, this isn't cozy, but it's doing well. So I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, we can all argue what is the quote unquote right thing, but it's all story. And I think that if once we stop being little shits about it, then maybe we can recognize that the uniqueness of a person's voice shouldn't be confined into our expectations.
Yeah, I think to brag on you and Laura for a minute, I think part
Yes,
of
please
what
do.
we're doing, part of what we're doing in the dialogue doctor space that I love is creating this culture of, I mean, I used to say the phrase, there is no spoon all the time. That like, there
Hmm.
is no, there is, what do you want? How does it work?
Yeah.
Is this achieving what you wanted to achieve? Is it going to sell? Well, that's a totally different question. That has more to do with marketing actually than quality. But is it what you want? And so like, or the other phrase that we've kind of adopted as a culture that I think is, I love that we keep it going, is that there's no rules, there's just tools. There's no
Yeah.
rules. You can do whatever you want. There's just, and like one of my favorite authors, Jose Saramago, you know, no punctuation. It's beautiful. It works once your mind flips into what he's doing. It's like, oh yeah, no, I don't need paragraph spacing. I don't need punctuation. You just give me a
Yep.
wall of words and my brain will make it make sense. And it's great.
Yep.
And then he plays with it and it's like, yeah, this is, but so anyway, to brag on our culture, I think I'd like that we've been able to do that some, but I do think there's I do like what you're saying in that, like, I think so. As somebody who does a lot of editing and teaching, one of my dreams is that people would come out of our communities having done something unexpected
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
beautiful. And that's part of the reason I'm a bad writer and marketer is I don't, I don't really care a lot about repeating the same old thing. I
Yeah.
want to see somebody do something really cool. And that's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. That tends to draw. I like being part of those cohorts more. If you give me a community that's like, hey, we're learning to write the tropes and we're learning to repeat the same old things, I'm kind of like, okay. But if you give me a community that's like, hey, we are gonna like really work to innovate on this thing together as a group, I'll take that community 10 times over the like, I have the right answer and we're all just going to learn the right answer together. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
now I'm just rambling for no reason. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, rambling in all of the book you're bringing. It's a good, I'm loving this.
Yeah. But yeah, I highly recommend it. It's a really good book. Honestly, just to think about how to apply it to writing. I know that it's specific to a writing workshop in a college, but I think that we can still pick pieces to apply to our
Well, I
indie
think the
world.
attitude she's communicating there are critical for building communities of authors. Like, like we said, writing's a team sport and you
Yep.
need each other. And knowing that you need each other, developing this attitude of humility first, right? Like, and I'm here as your teammate to empower you, not here to make you conform to what I think is good or bad. I
Yeah.
think is super important. And like you're saying, it doesn't remove I personal opinion. It doesn't
Hmm.
remove me saying like I don't like that this happened, but what it does is it positions personal opinion into the appropriate power of like,
Yeah.
first let's talk about what the author's looking to do and can I help you do that better, then I can give you my personal opinion after we've centered on what you're pursuing. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's still space for personal opinion, or personal opinion still matters, but it's not central or authoritative, which I think
Yeah.
is what I love about what you're describing is
And it's
repositioning yourself out of that power, giving power to the one you're trying to help. Yeah.
yeah. And it's not just humility, but it's the recognition that everybody in the room has a lived experience,
Yep.
and there are pieces to that that you may never understand.
Yeah.
And to understand that you will have that bias and it will be in varying levels to everyone in that room
Hmm.
means that when approaching the work, look for the uniqueness of that person. Try to connect with that person,
Yeah.
and through that connection, see and understand that they are a good writer, period. There is nothing here to say otherwise. And
Hmm.
that all you can do is offer what they're looking for in terms of help, recognizing that you yourself have those biases as well.
Yeah, I think the more we adapt this attitude, the more we're going to find ourselves longing to co-write, the more we're going to find ourselves long. Because once you start understanding that everybody brings value, I think you really fall in love with the value people bring. And I think
Yeah.
there's a literal character change that happens in us of like, once I started understanding that everybody has something wonderful to offer, regardless of
Yeah.
their educational background or what they, then now I just really want to work with everybody because I started
Yeah.
seeing all the like great stuff that they bring to the table. So, yeah.
Well, that's like with you and I mean, because we were writing Nerds and we were publishing it as it went, I think you can really see a moment in there where I realized that I had the space to make our characters more queer. You
Yeah.
can clearly see where that happens.
Yeah.
And that's something that like I kind of want people to see, because that's you can see that my voice was like, oh, I can add this now.
Hmm.
There was this holding back that I had in a lot of my work. And that time where I was like, hey, let's start this, romance going on between Ethan and Bryce, was kind of that moment in my writing career where I was like, I'm unapologetically queer. I'm going to add all of this to everything because this is my lived experience.
Hmm.
And I don't want to conform to the expectations that everyone kept putting on me. I was writing female characters because it was a code for me.
Hmm.
And then when we were writing Nerds, I just wanted to put in one queer man at the beginning because I was like, hey, it's like a little nod, but then we'll just write this ambiguous character for a while, until I was like, no, he's queer. Everyone's queer. Let's just put it in there. And so I really appreciate that writing with you, is it's just like it made that space of just like the ability to use that voice.
Yeah. Well, I'm super honored that I get to be a part of your story that way.
Yay.
You would have found that with or without me. And I love that. I love that I
Yeah.
get to be a part of that moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is, that is an honor for me to be like, man, I get to see JP find his stuff. And that's cool. Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. That
You
was
made
really
it
cool.
sappy.
Huh? I did make it sappy. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. No, but I love, yeah. And I think there is I think there is so much. I'm not going to go into the horror stories, but because we do have to wrap this at some point, but
At
there
some
are
point.
a lot of stories we hear about like, oh, I went to write with this person and they thought I was their intern. And like,
Hmm.
that's a weird, I can't imagine being in that relationship with somebody. That's such a weird, yeah. Anyway, so I like our relationship. I think you're fantastic. Making it
Yeah.
sappy and I'll stop. Anyway, thank you for bringing this book. Anything else from the book we need
Yeah.
to? I'm going to stop talking about us and talk about the book.
I don't think so. I don't
Okay.
think so. I think everyone should read it, to be honest. It's on audiobook, so I don't know.
Nice.
You should read it.
I love it. Yeah, I'm going to go read it now because I wasn't going to read it before, but now I am because it's really
Yeah.
good.
It's enjoyable.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for bringing this, JP. This was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'll stop the recording. We can talk a little bit more.
Okay.